they actually found the guy's head in the pond near the apartments, you know. So, you know, which was sad because he was a good tenant, you know. So, I mean, I'm sure his parents and family and everybody missed him too. But hey everybody, this is Matt Cox, and before we get into it, do me a favor and subscribe, hit the like button, share the video, and leave a comment for the algorithm. I need all the subscribers I can get. So I was watching Graham Stephan the other day, and he had this video on, and I know what you're gonna say, why are you harping on Graham Stephan? I watch a lot of his stuff. I was watching Graham Stephan, and I watched this video where he talked about different tenant stories that he had. It wasn't the eviction story, like I did one on like a reactions video the other day to that one, but this isn't it. He just told a bunch of different stories, and he doesn't have a lot of experience with insane tenants. I feel like most of his rental properties are probably pretty high end. Mine were not. Before I went to prison, I owned like about 54 rental units at one point. Now, of course, over the period of time that I've done real estate, I've owned well over 100 rental units. But at one point, I think the most rental units I ever had was about, let's say, in the mid 50s. So obviously, I did a lot of evictions and that sort of thing. But the funny thing is I was listening to Graham Stephan's stories, and you know, he had like, you know, he was pulling stories from other people he knows, and I thought, oh my God, like these stories are so mundane compared to the stories that I have. I'm gonna go ahead and tell you the first story that comes to my mind. The first story that comes to my mind, I mean, listen, I've had insane stories, but I mean, I've had people die in apartments. I've had investigations where the police like sealed off the apartment because somebody got murdered there, or they didn't know if the guy got murdered there. We've had all kinds of problems. So this is all back when I was married to this chick named Kayla Burgos. She, boy, that was rough. That was rough. I mean, she was Puerto Rican, and I mean, I'm not trying to be prejudiced. Puerto Rican women are mean as snakes. It was like she was like a prison guard. I mean, honestly, in a way, I should thank her. Kayla and I's marriage really prepared me for prison in a lot of ways. Forget it. Forget I even said that. I'm gonna cut that scene out if I think about it. Whatever. So here's what happened. Oh man, this is like the third cup of coffee. All right, so here's what happened. So the first one that comes to mind is this. I remember one time we'd rented to this chick who was like a stripper. So she's like a stripper. And I remember she came to my office. So I pulled a credit report on her, and she had several evictions show up on her credit. And so I told Kayla, I said, you know, absolutely not. She can't, we're not renting to her. And Kayla said, no, it'll be all right. I'll get, you know, she said that her boyfriend will sign the lease, and he's a lawyer. And I was like, a lawyer? I mean, she had stripper written all over. Not that I have a problem with strippers. I'm actually a big fan of strippers. But regardless, she was dating some guy who was a lawyer who'd obviously met her, you know, at the club. So I was like, I mean, okay. So then we had him fill out the application, pulled his credit. Of course, it's immaculate. It's perfect. And so I said, okay, she can move in. So she moved in, and about 2 months later, she stopped paying her rent. So my ex-wife contacted her, and she was like, you know, oh, well, he stopped paying my rent. I don't know what to do. And so, you know, my ex-wife's like, hey, listen, somebody's got to pay the rent. You have to pay, or I'm going to start evicting you. And she's like, yeah, I don't know. I'm going to have your rent. I'm going to have your rent, of course. So we start the eviction process. Well, you have to serve someone. I mean, you know, you can put a notice on the door and you can wait, and you know, there's not much, you don't really have to serve somebody at that point, but at some point you actually have to serve someone, or attempt to serve someone. Well, my ex-wife was like, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna serve the lawyer. So she calls the lawyer up and says, hey, listen, I mean, obviously you and this girl are having some issues. we're in the process of evicting. Where do you want me to serve, the eviction? And he's like, oh, well, I'm not paying for it. I stopped seeing her. She's crazy. She's on oxycodone, and she's on oxys, and she's nuts, and I'm not going to see her anymore. Well, listen, by this point, my ex-wife had figured out that the lawyer was actually married. And this was just this girl on the side. She says, okay, well, I have to have you served. And actually, she didn't really have to have him served. But she's like, look, I'm going to have you served. And he's like, oh, no, you don't have to have me served. You can serve her. You can put it on the door. You don't have to. And she's like, no, look, I need you to pay. Because he signed the lease. You signed the lease, so you're obligated to pay. And we're going to serve you. And he's like, you don't have to serve me. And look, it doesn't matter anyway. I'm a lawyer. I'll tie you up in court. You're never going to get any money from me, so don't even worry about it. And so my ex-wife says, that's fine. I'm not really worried about it. Because what we've decided to do is we're going to serve you at your house where you live with your wife and kids, which is wrong. But he immediately changes his tune. Whoa, wait a minute, because all the addresses he had given us were at his office. No, that's not right. You can't do that. My ex-wife's like, she goes, what do you mean that's not right? She goes, whoa. She goes, let me explain something. You just told me you signed a lease and you weren't going to pay. That's not right, and that you're going to get us tied up in court and spread it. So that's not right. We already know where your head's at. You're cheating on your wife, and you're going to try and screw us out of the money you owe us. So we're going to serve you, or my ex-wife said, I'm going to serve you at your house where your wife lives while you're at work. So he flips out. You can't do that. Hold on. What does she owe you? She didn't owe me anything. You owe me. So what ends up happening is he pays the rent, he pays the late fees. He then asks my ex-wife to complete the eviction. So she goes ahead, I should keep saying she, we ended up evicting this chick. And then it takes another month and a half to rent the apartment out, and he pays for that. I mean, listen, this guy got hit with $2,000 worth of rent and late fees and everything else. Now, Kayla could have left the apartment empty and just kept milking him, but she didn't. She found somebody else, rented it out. Here's the thing. About 4 days before the sheriff showed up and was going to basically throw her out, I'm at my office. She comes in my office and asks for one of my mortgage brokers. That mortgage broker's name was Johnny Moon. His father was named Johnny Moon too, by the way. Which I always thought was interesting. It wasn't John Moon, it was Johnny. It was like, she comes in and says, yeah, I need to talk to Johnny Moon. Well, Johnny Moon had a bunch of rental properties. So she walks in, she talks to him, he comes back, he goes, hey man, I need to pull this credit. And I go, well, you don't have to pull her credit, bro. We're evicting her right now. That's the chick that Kayla's evicting. Like, she didn't recognize me. And Johnny was like, oh man, bro, she's got a wad of money in her hand. He said, what do you think I should do? I said, don't rent to her. You're going to be evicting her. He goes, well, I'm going to get twice the deposit. I'll get twice the deposit. That'll be cool. And then she'll pay. She won't want to lose her deposit. And I go, I guarantee the deposit's not hers. It's probably the lawyer's. She probably showed up at his office and he just gave her a bunch of cash. He's trying to get her into a position where he's not on the lease anymore. And so Johnny says, no, I'm going to rent to her. So he goes ahead and he takes like double the deposit, first month's rent. The next month, boom, he has to evict her. Not only does he have to evict her, she she throws some stuff through a couple windows. She puts some dents in the drywall. She leaves a ton of crap. It was basically the apartment when we went into it after he evicted her. It was like a crack house. I mean, it was a drug den. There was just piles of laundry everywhere and McDonald's bags and garbage. And I mean, it was just completely trashed. Almost no furniture. And she just left. Who knows what happened to that chick? So that's one story I thought was funny, that my ex-wife kind of extorted the lawyer. That's wrong, and I feel bad about that. Here's the other story. Another story is, it's not an eviction story. What happened is, my ex-wife owns a bunch of apartments there in Tampa. So And she rents out a lot of these apartments Section 8. Well, she actually had at one point, I remember, a refrigerator. So somebody died in the house, in one of the apartments. And what had happened was initially we were freaking out. Well, she was freaking out. I wasn't freaking out because she was saying that she thought the refrigerator, that the guy had opened the refrigerator and it had fallen on him and like cracked his head open and he died. He was an old man. It turns out that although she was freaking out about this, it turned out that the guy had actually had a heart attack. And when he fell, he had opened up the refrigerator, and when he fell, he must have been holding on to the door and pulled the refrigerator down on top of him, and it did actually hit him in the head and cracked like his skull, but that's not why he died. So we had to go in there and clean out all of his stuff and everything, and that was a ton of stuff in there too. Another story I was thinking about was one time we had bought a bunch of apartments on what's called Leisurewood. It was a road, and there were 5 quadplexes. You know, a quadplex is 4 units. There were 5 4-unit buildings. We bought all 5 of them. I remember we repaved the parking lot. We fixed these things up. And we were getting the tenants out as their leases came up. We raised the rent and said, not too much, but enough that they wanted to leave. Because obviously, if you're paying, this is a long time ago. This is how long was it? Man, this might have been 19, 20 years ago. So the leases, the rent was like $600 a month. So if you raise it to like $750 or $800, they basically want to leave. So we're trying to get people out. Then we would go in, clean up the apartments, and rent them out for a higher rent. Well, when we bought the place, there were tenants there. One of the tenants was a guy that was like a Vietnam vet or something, and he was just insane. He was a drunk, and he was, I don't know if he was schizophrenic or not, but he basically he was taking a water hose and he was squirting down all the little kids in the neighborhood. So he had this long water hose that he actually ran from out of his house. So he'd hook it up inside the house and he'd spray down all these little kids. Well, he's spraying down people. Like my ex-wife's trying to bring in people, and he's screaming like, I don't want that person here. I don't want that. He's a drug dealer. And he starts squirting her and the new tenant or the potential tenant down with a water hose. Guy was just nuts. So we ended up evicting him. We had to go through mediation. We really didn't have to go through mediation. You don't have to go through mediation, but we were contacted by, Hillsborough County has a mediation board for evictions. We were contacted by them and asked to participate in the mediation, which we did. We went there. The guy ranted and raved, just went nuts for like 20 minutes. We explained what the issue was, and he didn't deny it. He went on this rant about having to protect the neighborhood and how he fought for this country. Started talking about the Viet Cong, and I mean, just off. Look, just nuts. So look, that wasn't going to happen. This is the worst part. Was the only reason it really went this far was he had been paying his rent. He was still willing to pay his rent, and that's a problem. Like, we just want you gone, and he's saying no. Here's your $600 and some odd dollars. And we're like, no. So he starts putting that money in an escrow account down at the courthouse. So the money's there. So he actually has a good argument, but he has no lease. We end up going to the final, the eviction. Like, he fights it the whole way, and we eventually have to go in front of a judge. If the tenant actually is fighting the eviction, you actually go in front of a judge and have like an evidentiary hearing where you actually have a discussion in front of the judge and explain the situation. So I remember showing up at the evidentiary hearing. So some of the properties were in my name, some were in my ex-wife's name. So when we walk into the courtroom, the judge says, all right, Mr. Cox, he said, you want to go ahead and explain to me what's going on with this eviction? And I remember I looked at the judge, I said, you know what, Your Honor? I forget the tenant's name, let's say Mr. Johnson. I go, you know what, Your Honor, I said, I think it would be best if we let Mr. Johnson explain his issues first. And the judge looked at me and went, all right, the judges are just like, all right, they have that whole air of superiority, that entitlement issue going on. He is, all right. So Mr. Johnson stands up and says, Your Honor, I fought for this country, and these drug dealers are moving in this neighborhood. I mean, he goes nuts. And so when they come in, I escort them down with the water hose. And he starts talking about how he still has his military issued 9mm, and how he squirts him down with the water hose so he doesn't have to shoot him in the head, because that's what he really wants to do. I mean, he goes nuts. And so as he's screaming and hollering, the judge keeps glancing at me, like he's glancing at him, glancing at me, glancing at him, glancing at me. And finally at some point he stopped, and the judge looked at me, and I said, Your Honor, we're trying to clean the place up and get better tenants in there. He's squirting them down with water hoses. And the judge just looked at him and went, okay, I'm going to go ahead and grant the eviction. I'm going to release the funds to Mr. Cox that you've been holding in escrow. And just like, you have 5 days to vacate or I think he gave him 10 days. You have 10 days to vacate the premises, or you will be, basically you will be thrown out. Boom, hits the thing and bolts. And that's it. So that was funny. My favorite story, however, is the time that we had this guy come, big black guy. I remember he worked at like a gas station, 7-Eleven type thing. So I remember he came in, filled out an application, and he had like 4 or 5 different evictions on his credit report. And I remember saying, he came in, and Kayla goes, look, I said, absolutely not. And so my ex-wife was like, listen, talk to him. His explanation actually kind of makes sense. So he comes in, and I remember he comes in, and he was extremely flamboyantly gay. And it was comical because he was like 6'2". So he came in and he was all, you don't understand, my ex-boyfriend stole my identity. He went out and then he got all of these leases for people that couldn't get leases. And then when they all stopped paying, because it wasn't in their name, they'd make a few payments and then they'd stop paying. He said all the evictions ended up on my credit. So he explained to me that his ex-boyfriend had stolen his identity and then gone out and gotten leases for people that could not get leases in his name. So, and I looked at it and I was like, it did make sense, because there were, within a week or two, there was a whole bunch of inquiries. Then several months later, there were a whole bunch of evictions. And so it was like, okay, well, he couldn't live at 5 places. So there was like 12 people like actually went out and got apartments, and like 5 out of 12 were evicted eventually. And it obviously made sense, because he certainly couldn't have been evicted from 5 places or leased all 12 places. Now, I don't know that he leased all 12 places. I'm saying there was like 12 inquiries, 10 or 12 inquiries, but I'm assuming those all ended up being leases. It made sense, but it was still iffy. So I said, okay, I'll lease you the place, but you've got to pay like 3 times the deposit. And he had the money. He came up with the money. He said, absolutely, I understand that. I forget what the deposit was, like $600 or something. So he comes up with $1,800 plus like $600 for the rent. This is insane. It's never been this noisy. And he was actually a great tenant. So he paid for, I don't know, 4 or 5 months, something like that. So then one day, the police end up calling my ex-wife, and they said, listen, we need to get into this apartment. And my ex-wife was like, okay, oh, that's whatever his name is, Jimmy's apartment. She goes, okay. So she drives down and says, well, what's the deal? And they said, look, basically they found his body in his vehicle. And so they said, we found what we believe is his body in his vehicle. We need to go into the apartment. She was just like, oh my God, this guy he was just he ended up being just like a super nice guy. So what happened was, she opened up the door, went inside, and she didn't go inside. They went inside. She stayed outside. They held the apartment for something like a week or so, and she started calling and complaining. Eventually, they released the apartment. When we went inside, I remember there were pieces of drywall that were like cut out of the side of the wall, and all of the stuff was still there. I'm so frustrated right now. There's a helicopter that's literally flying around. It's killing me. I don't have time to wait for it anymore. It flies off, it comes back. I just don't have time. What ended up happening was a few days later, an article came out in the newspaper that talked about how he'd been murdered. They'd found his body in his car, and they found his head in a pond near the apartments. You know, which, like I said, it was sad because he was a great tenant, paid his rent on time. Huge deposit, super nice guy, you know, and that's sad. So his family shows up, and I remember they came in, they cleaned out the apartment immaculately. Like they took everything, moved everything, like patched the holes in the wall, in the drywall, cleaned everything. And I remember after they gave the keys back, they contacted my ex-wife and said, listen, we'd like his deposit back. You have like an $1,800 deposit or something. And I remember my ex-wife said, well, I can't give you his deposit back. And they were like, why? We completely cleaned out the apartment. It's ready to be rented out. And I remember her excuse was he didn't give 30 days notice and he did not complete the lease. Therefore, he loses his deposit. That lets you know what I was dealing with. These people went nuts. I remember even when she called me, she said, oh, they're all upset. I don't understand. I was like, the guy died. And she's like, doesn't matter. She said, he still didn't complete the lease. I didn't get 30 days notice either. She said, no, you lose your deposit. I mean, just, wow. Those are my rental stories. I actually have a few more, but I'm not going to get into them. Do me a favor, go ahead and subscribe, hit the like button, share the video, leave a comment, and hey, buy my book. I was on the run for 3 years. I was #1 on the Secret Service's most wanted list. I was on the FBI's most wanted list. I was chased by the U.S. Marshals. Okay, I have a book. It's called Shark in the Housing Pool. Buy it.